Hi, I'm Danielle, and I'm so glad that you're here because together we're going to work through big stuff. Hi, and welcome to Big Stuff. I'm in a time in my life right now where lots of people are asking me how I am. I find people give me a hug and then they pull back and they hold my arms and they look deeply into my eyes and they say, "How are you?" And I say, "I'm doing okay." Really, I'm okay. And the truth is, I am mostly okay, but I'm definitely not entirely okay. As you may know, my mother died recently after a 35-year battle with multiple sclerosis. I've talked about her voluntary assisted death in 2 previous episodes. If you want to learn more about that, hop on over. But as much as I prepared and had lots of time to prepare for her death, I hadn't given too much thought to what comes after. Now, I've done grief before. My father died and my whole life blew up. I quit my job. I really kind of lost the plot. I drank loads. I took 3 months to really make a great dent in the couch before finding some kind of equilibrium again, finding my feet. So I want to talk a little bit today about grief and what actually happens, because I think that there is a great misunderstanding, and I have felt this myself, that grief is just about feeling sad, and it isn't. It is such a physical thing. Some of the research that I've read actually says that grief is maybe not an illness, but a disorder. Grief is a disorder in the brain. So let me tell you a little bit about what happens in your body. And I'm going to have to read this because I'm not a scientist. But grief is a very biological event, all right? It hits your mitochondria first, and then your brain perceives the loss as a threat because you have a status quo in your life, and then that status quo is thrown upside down by this loss. That loss is perceived as a threat, which sets off your emotional alarm system, which is the amygdala, your lizard brain, your lizard brain. That will flood your body with distress signals. Then your prefrontal cortex slows down. That's your focus and decision making. So simple tasks feel really overwhelming. If you are someone who has maybe some executive function disruption in the first place, such as ADHD, then this can hit you even harder. And there is a real brain fog. I feel emotionally like I'm doing okay, but I also feel completely exhausted. Sometimes I zone out and find it very hard to focus, or people will be talking and I will realize that I've just disappeared from the conversation completely. There is foggy thinking, forgetfulness, and emotional swings. They're not a weakness. They are literally your brain trying really hard to process your new normal. Your brain, in many respects, still expects the person to return because it takes time to understand that this thing is permanent, even though you might know logically it's permanent. That's why sometimes you might find yourself in the grief space thinking, "Oh, I'll just call this person. I'll just drop them a text. I wonder how they are." And then you go, oh, that's right. They're not here anymore. Your brain is still rewriting an internal map of how the world is now. So it's a whole lot going on at a much deeper level. But let's talk about how I am. Initially, I was quite surprised by how okay I was. I would have short, sharp bursts of crying, and then I would get on with it and just get about my day. I still had all the normal things to do. We weren't expecting Mum to die so soon. We thought it was going to be a few months away. So I had literally packed out my diary with work and travel. So I couldn't afford to fall apart just then and there. I had a week in between her death and travel, but then I had to zip it up and go. So what happened then, I had 2 events back to back. I was holding space. One of them, I was doing a workshop and then holding space as an MC. So I was holding the whole room for 3 days. And then I flew to the Gold Coast for another event where I attended an event and I was only on stage for actually 1 hour. Both of these events had hundreds and hundreds of people. It was busy. All I wanted to really be doing was gentle, quiet, peaceful. But sometimes we have to show up in our lives even when we would rather not. This was one of those times. And I knew that it was finite. I knew that I had this big week and then I had lots of time and space in order to take care of myself. But what actually happened while I was in these spaces was, even though I had logically decided, zip it up, we got to get on with it, soldier on, you can do it, compartmentalize, even though I had logically decided that, my body was keeping the score. My nervous system had decided how this was going to be. And what was happening for me would be really random things. Suddenly I wouldn't be able to feel my face, right? Suddenly my face would go numb or my hands would go numb and my heart would pound. There were moments where it felt like the back of my head opened up and I kind of slipped out of it and just started to observe myself. That's a condition or a thing known as dissociation. It can happen for people who have experienced or are experiencing trauma. Now, I don't particularly think that my mother's dying was a trauma, not like my father's death, for instance, which was, he died of cancer. It was more dramatic. It was more visceral. It was more like he really wasted away. There was like lots of like human stuff. Mum was not like that. Mum was just peaceful. She literally just went to sleep after we'd had a beautiful morning hanging out together, and it was lovely. So I don't consider it to be traumatic at all. But it is possible, in fact quite likely, judging by how my body was reacting, that I simply just hadn't had time to process in the way that I needed to, and then being surrounded by so much stimulus was making my body go, oh my God, I'm just so not ready for this. I just can't handle it. Now, the beauty of, firstly, the industry that I'm in and the relationships that I have with the people that I work for, I was able to say, I'm just sneaking off for 20 minutes, or while this person is on stage, I'm going to go and just breathe for a bit. Everyone was really awesome, really understanding. And the other thing that I knew would be very important in this is, don't try to pretend I'm okay. And I didn't. The very first thing I said when I got onto every stage was, I am not okay. This is what's going on in my life right now. And I'm here because I made a commitment to be here and it was important for me to be here. And I can also be great at my job and be going through a really big life moment. And it was great. I got loads of cuddles. I got loads of understanding. And I had lots of people coming up to me and reaching out and sharing their own stories of either voluntary assisted death or just that vulnerable space of having lost somebody important to them recently, and sharing what that meant, because grief and loss is often dealt with in such privacy, and everybody goes about their day. Everybody goes about the world as if it's completely normal. And you're like, oh my God, look at these people. Don't they know? Don't they understand that everything has changed? So I found myself struggling to sleep in that environment as well. So I literally had a whole week of really, really trying to keep it together. When I got to the Gold Coast for the second event, I was picked up by a very, very dear friend of mine, Carolyn, who is a safe space. And she poured me a whiskey. As you know, I haven't been drinking particularly. So we had a stiff whiskey and I told her the whole story from beginning to end. And we literally climbed into bed together and she held me while I cried. And that was the first time that I'd cried in a couple of weeks. And my body was shaking. There was all sorts of strange things coming out of my nervous system because it had been so wound so tight at the previous event. And this was just a safe space to unfurl and let some stuff out. So in hindsight, that week away may not have been the best choice. If I could have moved it, perhaps I should have. I am glad that I did it because I had plenty of support, lots of understanding, and I knew how to take care of myself and my nervous system within that. So I wasn't drinking apart from that stiff whiskey. I wasn't drinking. I was mindful of my nutrition. I was meditating regularly. I was doing lots of fascia release in the mornings. I was really as onto it as somebody can be. But the thing is with grief or any major life stuff that's going on, you can do all the right things. You can be doing all the right things, but there's still the emotional process is the emotional process. You can't bypass that stuff. If it's messy, it's messy. If it's quiet, it's quiet. If it's this, then that. It is a process and you just need to go through it. So I realized that I had these sort of mini anxiety moments where my heart was pounding. The more sleepless I got, the more sensitive I became to the pounding of my heart. I was checking my pulse, making sure that I was okay, and I was completely fine. I was just very sensitive to the pounding of my heart. And that is literally like my biology, my nervous system becoming really, really deeply honed to what is happening for me internally because I was so overwhelmed. There was definitely a very large element of not wanting to let people down. And I think that everybody would have understood. Of course they would. If I had called any of the organizers and said, hey, my mom has just died unexpectedly, except expectedly, strange, and I don't think that I can do this, they would have found somebody else really quickly and everyone would have got on with it and it would have been absolutely fine, I'm sure. There was a part of me that felt if I did that, if I let people down at the last moment, that I would get a black mark against my name. It might impact my work next year. So I would say that is probably an internal push more than a reflection of the people that I work with. And I suppose that is something that is, worth me thinking about. I know that I talk about it a lot, really taking care of yourself, only doing what you feel like you can, listening to yourself and honoring your boundaries. I talk about that all of the time. And obviously I do absolutely stand by that and live by that where I can. I do also respect sometimes you just have to get shit done in spite of what else is happening in your life. And I think that is where true leadership really comes into itself, and by leadership, I don't mean you have to be like in the C-suite or you have to be a leader. It's just like, it's when you have to make a decision to show up in spite of feeling like it's really, really challenging. I don't suggest anyone does it long term. As I said before, I knew that it was a really finite time and then I would be able to just go rest, fall apart, whatever I needed to do. I know sometimes people just push on through with grief. They just go back to work. They just keep on going. You shove it down, you shove it down, you shove it down. And then grief has a way of making itself known in other ways. So you can shove the volcano down as much as you like, but at some point, kapow, there is this big eruption. It's messy, and you realize that you've done that thing where you haven't processed your feelings in a resourceful way. Therefore, your body's just going to do it for you. When I read, like, so that the sciencey stuff that I read before about the mitochondria and the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, people had actually sent those to me so I could understand a little bit more about grief. And I found them to be really interesting articles, interesting things that I read. And it really made so much more sense on why grief is so much more than just sadness. I've also read, I don't know if this is true, I don't know how verifiable it is. However, it makes sense for me anecdotally. Your nervous system kind of deals out the grief in little bite-sized chunks. So that first couple of weeks, I would have a moment and then I would come back to balance. And then I would have another moment and I would come back to balance. The moments were quite spaced out. And then I heard that the full impact of grief doesn't really land until about 4 weeks later, when you realize that this is permanent. And the reason that your nervous system and your brain does it in this way is so that you don't completely fall apart and you can't function. I don't know how true this is. However, I don't know how you verify how your brain doles out little spurts of grief. However, I have seen it in others where they seem quite okay for a few weeks and then they go sort of down. Now, I was quite okay for the first few weeks and then I had a really rough few days and now I'm in a okay patch again. And I don't doubt that I will have rough days in the future. And that is kind of how grief is. It isn't linear. You're not sad and then a little bit less sad and then a little bit less sad and then like running through the fields, singing happily. It is a bit of a roller coaster. And pretty much you just got to get on that roller coaster and just roll with it. Allow. Obviously, we would like to imagine we have some kind of control over it. But realistically, when we understand that our body is rewiring itself on a cellular level to be able to function within this new normal, I mean, that's a whole thing. That is a much bigger process than just, I'm feeling sad and I hope that I soon feel less sad. Grief isn't something that you need to get over. And you don't. I did a lot of research into grieving and death and whatever prior to Mum's death. I read a number of books on dying and grieving, and it was a jolly time. I do wonder if all of the research that I had been doing, plus all of the writing I had been doing, because I am writing a book about Mum's experience, our experience together, and I wonder if that had helped me to process a lot of the stuff out in prior to her death. But understanding that there is a whole rewiring process going on, and it takes as long as it takes, and it is a subjective thing. Your mitochondria are social and relational, so they calibrate signals of safety and belonging and presence. So when that bond is severed, they need to recalibrate, okay? First, it's a violent thing, it's a painful thing, it's a chaotic thing, and then there is almost like a dip in your system while everything is working so busy in the background. This is why there is all of that exhaustion and stuff. So I have been doing practices that will support me in my healing process, such as massage, standard massage, exercise, sleep, again, huge, napping if I need to, meditation. I went and saw a body worker, Zoe Butler, in Kiama. It was amazing. And there was this one moment where she had one finger in my belly button, which is a super weird sensation, but one finger on my belly button and one finger on my back at the sort of opposite point. And these like sort of strange kind of waves of feeling came through my body, and I almost kind of like gagged and coughed, and it was like this stuff. And it's like something to do with the umbilical attachment to my mum. It's an energetic thing. You might think it's a little bit woo, but whatever it was a very physical experience for me. And after that, I was able to do the next layer of clearing through mum's stuff. So I totally believe that something shifted through that process, and I will 100% be going back to have a little bit more of her like amazing hands-on love. But it is this, I'm being a proactive griever rather than sitting on the couch and crying and wondering what the hell I'm doing with my life like I did the last time I lost a parent. A friend of mine actually did suggest something to me recently. I was a little bit concerned that I hadn't cried enough. Was I detached? Was I dissociated? Was I in denial? Was I pushing it away? Even when I was going through mum stuff, I just sort of had a little weep for a moment when I found something really beautiful, or, something I hadn't seen before, or whatever. And then it was kind of like it was over. I just wondered if I wasn't doing it right. You know how we do that? We judge how we do everything, even grieving. So yeah, I took the advice of a friend who said that when her dad died, she created Cry O'Clock. And Cry O'Clock was where you take some photos and you take, you have a specific time set aside, and you go to bed with the photos and you look at the photos and you allow all your feelings to come and you have a good cry. And then when the time is up, you put them away and you pack it up and off you go. And I have to say, Cry O'Clock was genius until it wasn't, because I was like so there and I was really feeling the feelings. I was crying it all out, and then couldn't turn it off. Could I? No, there was no snooze button on this clock. And that was me pretty much the day. So there I was driving to soccer practice with my daughter in the car, and she's like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "I've just got feelings." And she was really like, she was worried. She was a bit frightened by the ferocity of the feelings when I'm driving down the highway to soccer practice. And then I just dropped her at the gate and sat in the car park and just had a really good howl for a little while. And then I felt better, because that's kind of how it is, right? You let it out. And I was wiped out the next day, absolutely exhausted, because grief is tiring business. And then I feel okay again. So I have no doubt there will be more of those days. I don't know why this sort of scheduled crying seems easier than like just organic crying. Maybe I'm just very busy like doing stuff or getting on with things, or the crying comes when I'm doing stuff. So the idea of like really sitting in it, I don't know. I really am not too sure, but yeah, it definitely worked for me. It definitely worked for me. Did I need permission to fall apart? Possibly. There has also been some other stuff going on with my son, and I find it easier to cry about that. I've actually said that stuff going on with my kids is like my gateway drug to crying about my mum. So it's almost like it reaches this sort of critical mass, and then the tears come, and then I just cry about everything in general. But I wouldn't say that I'm crying all the time. I'm not falling apart. I'm not losing it. I think that I'm doing great. I'm doing really well. This is a very, very healthy, gentle form of grieving, and I'm proud of myself for not doing what I did before. Big life is obviously still happening. As I said, there's stuff going on with the kids. I don't really have time to just stop and ponder my belly button and my relationship with my mother. I am still dealing with the day-to-days, and that's a good thing, I think. That is a good thing. It keeps me very present. And actually, when I meditated and I asked the question, why is this stuff happening with my kids right now? And the answer came to me is because I need to be present. right? This is where I am now, and this is where my attention needs to be. I did go back to the choir. I went back to choir and they did sing Mum's song. I thought I might get away with it for a moment. Alas, I did not. And when the lyrics came up on the screen, my heart started racing. I was like, just push it down. Don't cry in public. I knew that everybody would be going, here's the song. How's she going to be? And I got really sort of paranoid about that, got really in my head about it. But I thought, it's okay. I'll be fine. Don't just run out of the room. Just sing the song. I got 3 lines in. Of course, I did 3 lines in and I cracked up. And rather than legging it, which is obviously my first instinct, everybody's first instinct, no doubt, because crying very publicly is such a mortifying thing for some reason. I don't know why, but I stayed. I just put my head down and I tried to keep singing, but God, it's hard to stay in tune when you've got all that tension in your throat and all the tears coming out. But someone just came and stood gently next to me and put her arm around me and she kept singing and everybody else kept singing. And it was, in fact, a very beautiful moment. Painful, yes. Therapeutic, definitely. It was a healing moment. And at the end of it, lots of people gave me a hug and they said that I did very well and I was very brave for being there. And I got out of there as quickly as I could, of course. But I do recognize that it was a brave thing to face that very difficult moment. There's no doubt that song is going to have a very long tail, as my friend described it the other day. That song will have a very long tail. Don't Dream It's Over by Crowded House. Whenever I hear it, it is going to remind me of those entire last few days and in particular her last few minutes. But I have realized that I do feel a little bit uncomfortable with saying, I'm not okay. I am far more comfortable saying I'm doing surprisingly okay. I'm doing much better than I thought I would. Obviously, it depends who I'm talking to. But when I think about grief and how everybody we know dies at some point, and they do. Everybody, everything we love, everyone we love is going to die at some point. There really isn't that many people walking around talking about grief. Or maybe when they are talking about it and you're not feeling it, it's hard for you to really relate. Or if you have never felt it to a large extent, in a big way, it might be hard to relate. But I suppose as I'm getting older, there will be more of this, more of my friends losing parents or partners, losing beloved anyone's. I don't think it will ever get easier. I think our discomfort with public displays of sadness is a very cultural thing. I know in some countries they wail and they ululate together. I think that would be very cathartic, don't you think? To really just let it all out in primal sound. That'd be awesome. Another friend of mine suggested that we have a walk and cry, basically once a quarter or once every half a year. We all get together and we go for a walk and we don't talk and we don't hug, we don't comfort each other, we just cry. And then we go for coffee. Who's in for Cry Club? I think that sounds great. But we have been told that being strong, a number of people said, I wish you strength. And I think that there is a belief that we need to be strong through all of these things. And I said to her, I don't want to be strong. I know I'm strong. I've dealt with all sorts of crazy stuff in my life. I know I'm strong. It's undoubtable. I don't want to be strong. I want to be soft. I want to allow and surrender to this process and to be okay with that. And to be okay with saying, I'm not okay, or today is a rough day. So I just want to leave today with the message that when you're grieving, you're not broken. Your body is not broken. Your heart is not broken. You are healing. And it takes time. And you need to be patient and you need to be kind. As your brain redraws this internal map, as your heart pulls itself back together, and then you grow around this loss. You grow around the grief. Your life continues until you weave a strong kind of net around where the pain lives, until eventually the net is strong enough to hold you, the pain, and everything else that's going on in your life, and then life just takes over again. So grief is love. That's the thing that I've learned more than anything. Grief is really love. And when we love, grief is the pain, the price we pay, the cost to play. And that's a gift. And that's a gift. I think also my belief in what happens after death is also a gift. So just a couple of things to think about today. How do you feel about big humanness in public spaces? How do you feel about, firstly when you see it, how do you feel about it? But then when it's you, how do you feel? And I hazard a guess that then you don't feel the same about both of those things when you see it versus when it's you. Think about that. What's that gap? Thank you very much for popping by. And if anybody wants to drop me a message and send me a little virtual hug, I am so here for all the love. I'll see you soon. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of Big Stuff as much as I enjoyed recording it for you. Now, if you did enjoy this episode, it would really help me if you wanted to share it with just one person that you think is going to get something out of it. And also feel free to drop a comment. All of these things really help podcasts to gain more ears, and that's what we're really here for. Also, be sure to subscribe, then you will never miss an episode. If you want to find out more about me, who I am, what I do, then you can go and check me out at daniellecolley.com.au. I'll see you next episode for more big stuff.